So there's a variety of options that would be booking alternatives to Airbnb. Probably the biggest alternative that I utilise because of my interest in staying in hotels and them being the priority for me is booking.com. I'm not specifically an advocate of one site over another, and the one thing to keep in mind very strongly about booking.com is, depending on the country, it doesn't just have hotels. It has resorts, it has retreats, it has managed by a private host. So you need to very much check the type of accommodation when you're looking for accommodation on this site and prioritize the one you want. So being that hotels are mine, it does have a lot of hotels and people predominantly use it for shorter bookings. And I think it has a restriction on the amount of time you can book through it. But it's a good one because it does give you the comparative. You can go into the membership a bit. I'm not supported by booking.com. I'm not suggesting I need to be supported by booking.com. There'll be just an email on my experiences with booking.com. And by no means do I think it's the be all and end all, but it's been convenient. And there's a lot of aspects I've been able to use on it in most countries. I don't think there's anywhere I've looked on it that isn't covered. So booking.com has quite a good global coverage, which I think is where it has a benefit for a lot of people to check. But it's a matter of kind of looking at the membership factor and determining what level you're at to see if there's any kind of benefit. It does help because you can get discounts to certain rates, and it obviously promotes certain businesses, but I found a lot of places on there that I probably wouldn't have known existed, maybe, that list on there quite predominantly. So that's one of probably the biggest ones I look at, and as I've said, it has a combination of everything. And you can do a lot of searching on it. So again, it's probably a whole video on its own, because this is just to give you some alternatives of options to book or things to think about when you're digital nomading, depending on whether you're doing just short stays or long stays. I aim for under any kind of tax implications, because in Europe I don't need to worry about that if I'm under a certain period of time. So I probably wouldn't be staying anywhere more than 4 to 6 months, but I also don't necessarily stay somewhere 4 to 6 months, or not at this point, or for this period. I have, which I'll cover in a minute. But so booking.com's probably been the main one I've gone to, that if there were questions, I could probably answer some of them about it, or I'll try and give some insights into how I use it. So if that's helpful for people, and key things to look at and features of it. So I'll utilize them for you and maybe show them and demonstrate some of them. It's probably a good idea. There's a second site that's probably the only other one that I've used most consistently to speak to, and it's a site called Homelike. I think it's just www.homelike. And it's more for long-term accommodation. So the criteria for it is you must be somewhere at least a month. So often that's better for digital nomads, because then you book somewhere for a month and you see how it goes. Now, with this site, my experience is it has a range of things. 2 out of my 3 experiences on there were actually hotels that that put themselves forward for long stay options. I believe there are private managed hosts. The third one I think was a corporate service departments, and surprisingly the least impressive. So, and with the 3 of them, they're not everywhere. So Homelike has a restriction on its coverage. It's mainly major cities. So I stayed in Vienna, Dublin, and Amstelveen, which is basically the suburb or locality just beside Amsterdam. So I was about 20 minutes into the main city, and I'd prefer to stay a bit outside of it then, because you get a bigger accommodation. It was quieter. I was working. It was a benefit to me. And I'd also done it last minute, so there weren't a lot of options that particular year, but it's got a lot of things in cities, and you can book. So the one in Vienna, I was there for 4 months, I think, mid-September to mid-January. So I was able to just book through the whole period of time, and it was like having an apartment, but not having, separate costs, and the reasons why I really like hotels. So it's one I have had a reasonable service experience with. I would not necessarily recommend all of the locations I stayed, and I'll do reviews on them separately. But I would definitely say it has options it's worth looking at. If you're doing an actual corporate relocation, because I was corporate relocated to the first hotel I stayed in, they often have a different rate. So they'll often, you've got restricted cleaning or less maybe amenities, but it's in a specific site that the corporate companies have a deal with hotels. I don't know how you access those because I was sent the link from the company that was relocating me at that time when I did the Berlin relocation, which was the early one. And I will do a review on that hotel. That hotel was great. But there are probably sites I don't have access to that if you've got a little more corporate connect or corporate travel connect, you may have access to. They might be able to be booked through, or you might be able to book through someone who does that. And they usually get a better rate. But as I said, there's less services. So it's probably not a restriction to things like a pool or a gym, but it might be like they're only clean twice a week versus every day or whatever it is. And again, for the most part, you don't actually need that. The main things you're looking for, which I'm going to do a whole other video on because I have a whole attitude now about what hotels should do for cleaning and upkeep. Because for me personally, you don't always need it cleaned every day, but every 3 days you need at least 3 things done. Anyway, another video. But so they're the first, probably the 2 priorities. There'd be booking.com, homelike.com, I think it's .com, but Homelike, it'll come up. Even if you Google long-term accommodation Europe, it'll come up. House sitting is another one. There's a few options for that. I have not done that in a formal sense. There's trusted house sitters. There's a few online. Now, with those you usually don't pay. There might be a subscription that you pay per year, but it's unpaid accommodation, and there's usually some requirements: watering plants, looking after pets, basic upkeep. And I have done some house sitting, but it was really word of mouth and kind of accidental. So I have house sat for people in Oz. I've house sat for a friend in the UK a few times. I was looking after his cat. The ones in Oz, again, another cat. Another person in London, cat. I seem to have done a lot of cat now that I think about it. And I actually hotel sat for a couple of months, which was really random. They're not a common thing, and this was a small hotel that was mainly closed, but it was looking after the dog. So I did do a dog, and or I did do a dog house sit, I should say, and cranking the generator and doing some basic stuff. All of these were unpaid, but say for example the one that was actually in Grenada in the West Indies meant that I could. I didn't pay for my accommodation, which was really beneficial, and there was a car I could drive. So, I just paid for the gas or petrol and looked after myself with food, which was really reasonable in Grenada, particularly if you go to the markets in, I can't remember the main town in Grenada now. I keep thinking Bridgetown, but that's Barbados. I'll probably put it up on the screen because I can't remember. That's really bad. And I'd been a few times to Grenada now, 3 or 4, but yeah, so house sitting is another option. And if you can schedule that, I'd looked one up, and if I could time it in Iceland at the time, I think you needed vaccinations I didn't have then, I would have considered that. So, and they had a lot more animals. So it doesn't just have to be cats and dogs, it can be horses if you have that background with them, or if you have more of a background in horticulture, and it's like a farm or a permaculture farm or that kind of thing. There's a lot of options. I don't have a stack of expertise to give you on that. If I've done any quick searches, I'll pop them up. But yeah, and I think there's a House Sitters World one where you can subscribe. You know what, I'll give them a shout out on this because I was with them a while ago, and I don't know if I've pursued anything, but I think they're quite a reasonable price every year, and they publish them around the world. So sometimes you do need references, and you need to kind of get your first step on the ladder. And some locations are very popular, and some are really short ones. People go for a week and they want someone to look after the pets. Others are longer. It depends on who it is and where and what. So it's very hit and miss, and there's a lot of variables in that. So it's doable, but you'd be best to kind of do your own research on that one and see if it's viable and suits you. There probably are a lot of sites out there I haven't specifically booked through, so it might be worth you just doing a bit of a Google. I'm sure there are more sites out there to look up depending on what suits you. And of course, if you're staying anywhere for 6 months to a year, you can actually go through the standard renting a place. wherever it is. So I did that in Germany, and I was actually able to break it after a short period of time because it was actually a holiday rental. But Germany's a hit and miss factor because you've got a situation where it's very competitive, say in cities like Berlin. In fact, it's pretty competitive in most places, and they prefer longer term rentals. So you'd need to check out by city. So at one stage I was actually thinking of buying and renting a place in Belgium. I thought, I wonder what that's like. And I looked it up, and apparently their average rentals are 6 to 9 years. Yeah, I said years, not months, years. 3 years is considered a short-term rental. So a lot of it's going to depend on where it is. I remember watching some videos on some nomads, say in Croatia, and they would book a place for 6 to 12 months. So if you're on a visa, it would be worth you booking a place. It would depend on what you could get included. So the one thing with the Berlin one is it was furnished, it included internet. So all my costs were kind of in one package, which was really helpful. Different places also have broadcast licenses if you're there for over 6 to 12 months. And of course, depending on whether you're on a Nomad visa there, the tax implications. So the longer term stuff, you could go through a standard real estate agent, or you could Google in different places to see which real estate agencies are the priority. It is an interesting thing in Germany. The biggest challenges I had when we were looking for accommodation there was everything obviously was in German, but you can then either have a relocation agent help you if you're staying in a hotel when you're looking, or anywhere you are, just even Google Translate it. But it's very competitive, so any help you can get with that is really beneficial. It might also be worth looking into where, if you're digital nomading that way, if you want to stay with other people. So a priority for me is living alone. I don't want to live with other people. The closest I've come to doing that is I did stay in a share house when I was in London to get vaccinated, the end of 2021 or 22, I think it's 22. And it had a shared kitchen, but you had your own room and bathroom. And the hosts were fabulous, by the way. I wouldn't do it again, though. I don't like sharing space. I don't like having to talk to people when it suits them. I prefer the space to myself. I'm older, which is a key point with it too. So I like to just be able to make whatever noise I need to make. I'm actually not very noisy, but I prefer to not have to worry about if I cough or something happens. So having the space to myself is a key thing. But there are options in most cities to rent a room like you would anywhere. So that's another option for a lot of people, but for me, it's a no. So everything I've mentioned is very much based on you just being on your own and having your place to yourself, and having a place that offers all the opportunities you need. So it has a kitchen, it has laundry in the building and or in the room, or it has like a paid service very much nearby, depending on where it is. And you have access to supermarkets, etc., etc. So yeah, so they're your options when it comes to Airbnb alternatives.